Springbok Scrum, the two words that changed world rugby. When rugby fans talk about the Springboks, the conversation often turns to power. Many people believe South Africa's dominance in the scrum comes from size, strength, or a tradition of producing physically imposing players. The common story is simple: big men raised on farms, built for the toughest battles in world rugby. But according to the people who helped create the modern Springbok scrum, the real story is very different. It is not a story about genetics or luck. It is a story about a mindset, a question, and a vision that transformed one of rugby's most important set pieces into the most feared weapon in the game. The turning point came shortly after Rassie Erasmus began reshaping South African rugby. During a discussion with his front row players, coaches asked why the Springboks no longer dominated scrums the way earlier South African teams had. The players responded with what seemed like common sense. They explained that teams could not realistically attack every scrum in search of a penalty. Most sides viewed scrums as a way to restart play and maintain possession. Pushing for dominance every single time seemed unnecessary and exhausting. But Rassie Erasmus had a different perspective. He reportedly smiled and asked a simple question: why not? Those two words would become the foundation of a philosophy that changed everything. Instead of accepting limits that many teams had quietly agreed upon, Erasmus challenged his players to rethink what was possible. His message was clear: if the team was fit enough, technically prepared, and mentally committed, there was no reason not to fight for dominance at every scrum, whether there were 2 scrums in a match or 20. That idea became more than a tactic. It became part of South Africa's rugby identity. Former Springbok hooker Schalk Brits later described the team's approach with 3 simple words: scrum, steal, and smash. For South Africa, everything begins at the scrum. Win the battle there, gain territory, create momentum, and suddenly the rest of the game starts to tilt in your favor. Over time, rugby supporters around the world began associating the Springboks with overwhelming scrum power. Yet many observers continued to believe that physical size alone explained their success. The numbers tell a different story. Throughout the Erasmus era, South Africa consistently ranked among the world's best in scrum success, scrum penalties won, and overall set-piece efficiency. These achievements were not occasional flashes of brilliance. They became a pattern repeated year after year against the strongest rugby nations. The evidence suggested that technique, preparation, and teamwork were far more important than simple physical advantages. Former Springbok prop Steven Kitshoff has repeatedly challenged the popular myths surrounding South African scrummaging. According to him, the idea that success comes purely from size ignores the countless hours of technical work performed behind the scenes. The real secret, he argues, lies in repetition, trust, and attention to detail. Players spend years refining their body positions, timing, and coordination. Every movement matters. Every player has a role. The scrum is not about 8 individuals trying to overpower opponents. It is about 8 players functioning as a single unit. Schalk Brits offered a similar explanation when discussing the structure of the Springbok pack. He described the front row as the wheels of a machine and the remaining forwards as the engine. If the front row fails to perform correctly, the power generated by the players behind them is wasted. That understanding helped create a culture where the scrum became a collective responsibility rather than an individual contest. One of the most fascinating aspects of South Africa's rise was the environment created within the squad itself. In many teams, training scrums can become personal battles. Players compete against teammates and focus on proving who is stronger or more skilled. The Springboks deliberately moved away from that mentality. According to former players, the emphasis shifted toward learning and improvement. If one player gained an advantage over another during training, the focus was not on embarrassment or blame. Instead, teammates would discuss what happened, identify the technical reasons behind the result, and find ways to improve together. This approach encouraged honesty, collaboration, and continuous development. The result was a culture where players were willing to share knowledge rather than protect it. Some within the squad even described the environment as a kind of Scrum university, where learning never stopped. This culture also influenced one of the most famous tactical innovations associated with the Springboks, the use of a powerful replacement bench. Rather than viewing starting and substitute front row players as separate groups, Erasmus encouraged them to think of themselves as two equally important units. The goal was not simply to replace tired players. The goal was to present opponents with a completely different challenge later in the match. A prop who had spent an hour adjusting to one style of scrummaging could suddenly face a new combination with different strengths and techniques. By that stage, fatigue often made adaptation much more difficult. The strategy helped South Africa maintain pressure deep into matches and contributed to some of their most memorable victories. What made the philosophy even more significant was the way the squad valued every contribution. Reports from within the Springbok camp suggested that reward structures reflected the belief that starters and finishers were equally important. This reinforced the message that success belonged to the entire squad rather than a select group of players. Every member had a role in building and maintaining Scrum dominance. The arrival of Scrum coach Daan Human added another layer of refinement to the system. Human focused heavily on unity and synchronization. One concept frequently associated with his coaching is the idea that all 8 players must work through a single point of pressure. Rather than 8 individuals pushing in slightly different directions, the entire pack aims to function as one connected force. This level of coordination requires extraordinary discipline and training, but when executed correctly, it can make a scrum remarkably effective. Human's influence extended beyond international matches. Stories emerged of players traveling to work with him in specialized training environments where conditioning and technical development received intense attention. These efforts highlighted how seriously South Africa treated scrummaging compared to many other nations. While other teams often focused heavily on attack and defensive systems, the Springboks continued investing significant resources into perfecting one of rugby's oldest skills. Their commitment produced results that were impossible to ignore. As South Africa's scrum became increasingly dominant, discussions about the future of scrummaging began to emerge across the rugby world. Various law changes and interpretations have been introduced over the years in an effort to improve game flow and player safety. Some observers believe these adjustments have reduced the influence of the scrum compared to previous eras. Others argue that the scrum remains an essential part of rugby's identity and should continue rewarding teams that master the skill. The debate has become particularly relevant because of South Africa's success. If a team spends years developing an area of excellence, should the game reduce the rewards associated with that skill? Or should those achievements be celebrated as examples of rugby innovation and dedication? Opinions vary, but there is little disagreement about one point. The modern Springbok scrum did not emerge by accident. It was carefully built through coaching, planning, culture, and relentless effort. What makes this story so compelling is that it challenges many assumptions about sporting success. The easy explanation is often the most attractive one. It is simple to look at a dominant team and assume their advantages are natural or unavoidable. The truth is usually more complex. Behind every successful system are countless hours of work that fans rarely see. The Springboks did not become rugby's most feared scrummaging